I'm your host, Gwen Mdinaradze, and today we're diving into a topic that is reshaping the future of work in profound ways. The title of today's episode is The Future of Work is Human: What Motherhood Reveals About the Evolving Roles of Leaders and the Hidden ROI of Working Parents. As organizations navigate rapid change, one truth is becoming undeniable. Human-centered leadership is not a nice to have, it's a business imperative. And for years, an invaluable incubator of workforce talent development and ROI has been sitting right in front of us: parenthood, particularly motherhood. My guest today, Dr. Becca Clanton, is a scholar practitioner who recently conducted and published research examining U.S. mothers' return to work experiences through their stories, finding that motherhood transformed the way women lead, work, and influence the culture around them. Her research argues that supporting working parents is not just the right thing to do. It's one of the most overlooked avenues for organizational growth, retention, and innovation. Becca, welcome.
Thanks, Gwen. It's so good to be here with you. I appreciate you having me today.
Likewise, I'm so excited to dive into this conversation. And Becca, I'd love to start with your personal journey. What sparked your interest in studying or supporting the experiences of working parents, and how did your own story shape that?
Good question. So for my profession, I work in a specialty area of HR called learning and talent development. So this is something that I am living and breathing every day as far as figuring out how do we grow and retain great talent in the workforce. But long before I was in HR and long before I was even a parent myself, college Becca, who was studying econ, had a class that fascinated me around wage distribution and poverty. And one of the gaps that surprised me was not so much the male to female wage gap that existed still. But when you look into that wage gap, what I saw was that the biggest differentiator of equal pay had to do a lot around your parenthood status. So mothers, specifically single mothers, that gap was even widening. It wasn't getting better, not even incrementally. It was getting worse in the US. And so that already back then left me with a lot of curiosities about why, like what's going on that's not working right now for working parents in the workplace. And then as my career evolved and as my own personal journey evolved to become a mother, I became increasingly more passionate about this. And then when the COVID pandemic hit the world and we started to see rates of mothers and parents, but more specifically mothers, dropping out of the workforce at a pretty alarming rate, it felt like we were going even further backwards in progress. And I became really interested in trying to solve the puzzle for how do we retain this excellent talent segment so that we can have a competitive advantage at work.
I relate that so much, Becca. For me, becoming a mother did not just change my priorities, it completely reshaped how I see leadership and the future of work. You suddenly notice all the invisible frictions that workplaces create for parents, and it becomes, impossible not to want to fix them. When you look back on your transition into motherhood, what shifted for you in your identity, in your leadership, or how you show up at work?
I think sometimes what I had assumed I would find when I started asking questions and researching this topic was that maybe mothers felt pretty defeated or set back in their career, but what they said really resonated with me in their answers because it made me reflect on my own experience a lot, in which I really do think that I became the best version of a leader through parenthood. So sometimes when I'm teaching leadership development courses, I find that I'm like applying parenthood tactics in some of the advice that we're giving and some of the skills that we're teaching, because they're really related. And I would say that you have this life experience that is potentially your greatest leadership development tool ever. And why we don't see it as such, or even other life events where you as a human are greatly transformed through the experience, and in many ways for the better. It ends up making you an even more valuable talent resource. And it's something that you're getting kind of organically from this personal experience. So all that to say is I felt way more confident in my own skin. I felt like I knew myself so much better. It was easier for me to time manage because my priorities became a lot clearer. And they in some ways they were self-imposed, but also it was making the most out of my day efficiently because I had someone at home that was waiting for me. So I think all that to say is it made me more comfortable and confident in who I was, and also more confident and I think empathetic and efficient as a leader.
Oh, I love that. I love the comparison between leadership and the motherhood, and the fact that we do so many things at the same time that, being able to do time management, right? And your research, I think, uncovers something powerful, that motherhood does not diminish leadership capability. It often deepens it. So I love that comparison.
What was super fascinating to me was hearing how, when asking questions about whether or not there were any work-related skills that motherhood gave these parents when they had this experience or this life-changing experience, much of what I just shared with you was my own experience, is what I heard over and over and over again from these mothers. So when I collected all the data, at the top of that list ended up being empathy, emotional intelligence, time management, efficiency, as I had mentioned, confidence in oneself and also on the job, better boundary setting, resilience. But generally speaking, if people had to boil it down to something, they saw themselves as a way more human-centric leader, understanding that the people around them were not just purely workers anymore. They were also people behind the worker. And I know we all understand that in theory, and it's not to say that those who aren't parents can't come to the same conclusion, but I did notice that theme when I was talking to people about just how much stronger they felt being able to identify and relate to the people around them at work.
Right. You just shared some of them, but can you tell us more about some of the leadership strengths, capabilities, or potential that emerge or get amplified through motherhood?
There's one story that stands out about someone who, when I interviewed her, she was a partner at a consulting firm. At the time she was a mother, she was a junior partner at a consulting firm. And one of the things that surprised her about being a mother is that I think she's a little bit nervous about how her clients would react to her having this competing priority. And also, she was one of the only few working mothers or leaders who were mothers in this organization at the time, because it was a bit smaller. She actually felt like she had an easier time building client relationships because she was a mom or a parent, and now she could relate to them on that level, or who she was working with. And she felt like there was more grace extended both ways, kind of across the table. And she even felt like her selling ability as a junior partner, then became partner, became better because of that parenthood status. So I think that was a really good example where even like in sales, she felt like it became a competitive advantage. Of course, that was not the intention behind it, but it felt like a kind of a byproduct of that life experience, shared life experience.
Wow, I love that. You've mentioned skills such as empathy, decision making under constraints, resilience, self awareness, and prioritization. Can you share how you've seen this show up in real examples or stories from your participants? I love the story you shared, but do you have more you can share with our audience?
Yeah, there's one around the need to let go of what I'll call perfectionism, or redefining how we view productivity. So many of the women, the segment of mothers that I studied were those who had some kind of a component of overnight travel for work. And the reason why I wanted to focus on that is because there are a lot of professions that require some overnight travel. And generally speaking, it's not where we end up being able to retain a lot of women past a certain age.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to know more about what that experience was like so that we can be better equipped as HR professionals, organizations, leaders, even potentially mothers ourselves. Like, how do we navigate that so that we can retain people who want to stay in that role, in that career? So I wanted to give that context because many of the women that I interviewed self-identified as being very high achieving, and they would share some of the KPIs or the past performance reviews that just kind of historically show some of that high achievement. What I also heard is that work was the career was very central to their identity before becoming a mother. And when they became a mother, all of a sudden that identity really was challenged. It was questioned, and there was a competing identity that was now kind of entered the equation. Mm-hmm. And there were usually either percentages or numbers that came up in their description of some of what they learned and experienced about themselves during that time. But what I heard is that my 80% is equal to others' 100%, meaning they may not be putting in the same number of hours before, or they might feel like they weren't putting in as much like mental effort thinking about work around the clock, even when they weren't, in the office. But yet they found that somehow they were still able to keep up or exceed the KPIs or their goals that they had at work, that their performance ratings weren't suffering. This is their self-perception. I wasn't collecting data on actual results, right? But from what they shared with me, letting go of work being their 24/7 thought ended up still being very good for their performance and their how they perceive themselves, but also some of those KPIs that I mentioned. So kind of letting go of feeling like you have to be on all the time in order to be good at your job or to excel at your job. I think they had a big aha that it was like, man, maybe that was not working as well for me as I thought it was, because this new way also works. So it kind of challenged some of those assumptions that maybe we hold about, always being on, always being available, because turns out they were just as successful in almost every single case, if not more so, than their previous pre-kid work ethic and work style.
Right. So, Becca, we've talked about capabilities and leadership qualities. Why do you think traditional workplaces have historically undervalued or overlooked these capabilities, even though they are exactly what organizations say they want today?
That is such a loaded question, and I don't know if I'll have the answer for it, but I can give you what I observed in some of my own takeaways as what I think some of those challenges are. I think we live in a world of celebrating and incentivizing short-term gains. I think we oftentimes are focused on making numbers for a quarter, and not always finding the right balance of how to look a little bit more long-term. And because I work in the world of talent, I know that you have to strike a balance. I don't live in fantasy land that we can only invest in long-term talent, because then who knows, who's to say there's going to be a business to even have talent for if we're not also focused on the short term. But you can't become so short-term focused that you're not building a pipeline for the future. And that sometimes does take a trade-off and an investment. We focus too much on the short term. And is there going to be short-term disruption because we have people out on leave, and then when they come back, there is going to be a ramp-up period back to full productivity? Yeah, there will be a short-term impact. But are those people also going to be more loyal to the organization if they have a great experience, if they feel welcome back? Are they going to be giving far more discretionary effort because of some of that organizational loyalty? Absolutely. I heard story after story about how when the mothers came back, they wanted to help other parents going through the experience. They wanted to set up new mentorship programs for parents helping parents. They wanted to make sure that the parking lot that they slept in their third trimester was no longer an issue for future parents who had to walk from the parking lot. So that junior partner I was telling you about too, she helped advocate for the first ever parental leave at that organization after she came back, paid parental leave. And so I'm using examples that are focused on parents helping other parents in the workforce, but these individuals are also very strong leaders, strong salespeople. They're giving a lot to the organization beyond just those things around, surrounding parenthood. So I would say we undervalue some of the intangibles that parents can bring, but they are a huge talent segment in the workforce, and it's hard to quantify. So it's hard to know how much to invest. I think it really does take a little bit more of a long game strategy mixed with how to balance the short-term wins and costs.
Oh, I love the fact that experienced parents are actually supporting new parents and they are building different support systems for one another. It's just so powerful. The power of community. I love that. And thank you for sharing.
One of the other things that is an intangible that I don't know how to measure, there might be someone out there far smarter who can figure this out, but there were a lot of people that had mentioned that they either did or did not see themselves fitting the mold when they came back as a parent. And it had a lot to do with who they saw in senior leadership positions and whether or not those individuals either were parents or kind of embraced that identity as working parent and talked about it, including maybe even some of the hardships that come with being a working parent. So just simply having people, visible, high profile working parents in your organizations, that is a retention tactic. And again, I don't know how to quantify that, but I know that it was something that caused the mothers I interviewed to decide whether or not they wanted to stay and whether or not they saw themselves as having a path to achieving their goals based off of whether or not others had gone before them and done it and been successful.
Becca, let's talk about the idea of a hidden ROI. When you use the phrase hidden ROI of working parents, what do you mean by that?
I think much of what we just talked about is that there's going to be some things that are hard to quantify in the short term. You can absolutely try to segment employee engagement survey scores, to figure out whether or not there are different employee segments that are staying happy, engaged. But generally speaking, I think there's going to be a lot that isn't seen from an ROI standpoint. Like what I had mentioned, the mothers saying that they perceive their performance to largely stay the same, if not improve, as a result of coming back to work after becoming a parent. I shared some of those stories about really powerful examples, and not just the junior partner, but also a medical device regional sales leader was saying that she had a much better time relating to customers because she was selling into business to business selling, in which many of her customers were mothers too. And going back to that point of like the representation really does matter. If I don't even need to know you, Gwen, but if I see you being a mother, being a CEO of an organization, and I work in your organization, that's going to give me a lot of nonverbal signals about what potential I have here. And there were cases in some of the women that I interviewed where when they didn't see that at the top, they left. It really does make a difference. So all of that, again, hard to quantify, hard to put an ROI around, but no doubt you lose one mother, you're not just losing one mother. You're losing a mentor to other mothers. You're losing potentially a figurehead that other women are seeing as an opportunity to grow into that role someday. They're maybe even seeing how parents are being represented in decision-making day to day in the organization. And I do see a lot of that through the storytelling that the mothers were sharing with me, a lot of the discretionary effort that I had mentioned about informal mentorship, formal mentorship. Some people stood up employee resource groups for working parents that didn't exist before. And then some of that other family-friendly advocacy, like expectant mother parking spaces in very large corporate parking lots. So I would love to get to a point where I can find an ROI around that. I didn't quite get there with this round of research, but we'll get there someday.
Well, I think you found emotional ROI, which is very important, right? So I love the way you framed ROI because it matches what I've seen in organizations. Working parents often end up being the culture carriers. You mentioned the mentorship program. You mentioned community, how they support one another. And, as I said, it's emotional backbone. Emotional ROI is found by you, and I applaud this. It's just so important for organizations to support working parents because, as you said, then they will go back and support one another. And none of that really shows up on a balance sheet, but it's exactly what keeps people engaged and staying and motivated, I would say.
Yeah. So Gwen, I know you and I hail from the same Penn program, and even while I was in school, I remember a mother who was a student in the same program coming up to me and saying, wow, like if you can work full time, do this program and be a mom, like I can do it. And I looked at her and I was like, oh, please don't say that. I was like, at no point in this program have I felt like I'm doing a great job on all fronts, because one of the buckets is always getting less. And I didn't want to be a role model because I felt like I was the worst role model to be trying to, to try to set as a good example. But the reality is, if it helped her, that's great. And that's how I feel about mothers in the workforce. They might feel like they don't have any of their stuff together, right? But other people seeing them, it still serves as an inspiration. And I think that's super critical to not minimize just the importance of like that visibility and sense of community, and it really is something that can accelerate community because it's a very vulnerable identity to have. And when you find other people that are in a similar situation, you can't help but want to help. And I think we could use more of that, generally speaking, in the workforce, even beyond parenthood, right? A little bit of shared humanity.
Love that. So, Becca, if you were advising an executive team or leaders, the organization, where to start? What are the top things they should prioritize to support working parents in a strategic, more sustainable way?
Okay, I'm going to answer this in two parts, if that works. I'm going to answer it first. And in order to begin, I think we need to challenge some assumptions or outdated myths that exist out there about parents, such as that they're less committed to their jobs or that their career aspirations have lessened because they've become parents. We want to make sure that we're not holding on to any assumptions about what limitations this person now has as a parent. And I think a lot of it comes from a really good place where people want to be conscientious of like, oh, they might want to get home for dinner, or, oh, I don't think they're not going to want to go to this conference because XYZ. It's going to be hard on their family. That is really well intended, and it can also really backfire when you start making assumptions on behalf of other people. So I think that's kind of the first one, is like we have to check our assumptions and make sure we're letting go of maybe some of those not super accurate portrayals of what parents do and do not want and what value they bring to the organization. The other thing that I've heard often, and this kind of came back with a vengeance after COVID, is this idea that if we do it for one person, we have to do it for everybody. I heard in some of the stories that when mothers were really struggling, whether or not it was with overnight trips, when they talked to HR or their leader about wanting maybe just a short term, like, hey, maybe can I wait till I'm 6 months, till my baby's 6 months before I start traveling again overnight?
Right.
Parenthood wasn't really an acceptable accommodation in their eyes, or from the perspective of the HR leader or the leader. And some of that pushback was, but if we do it for you, we have to do it for everyone. We have to find a way around that in order to do what's right for the individual, because everybody's family situation, everybody's desire to be home or not be home by a certain time is going to be wildly different. And I think the biggest thing is we don't want to make assumptions. We want to ask and keep dialogue open, and kind of keep really close to that individual for the first, 3, 6, 9 months post returning to work. So that was the first part. Second part is, I already mentioned the open and frequent conversation and dialogue. That is probably best had with your direct manager, but it might also be HR professionals that are receiving some of those questions and requests for maybe short-term accommodations. Whatever extent possible, try to think about how you can embed just a little bit of flexibility for that individual when they come back, because often they don't know what to ask for if they've never been in that situation before. I know that I did not. I didn't know that I should block my calendar for pump breaks. I didn't know that it was going to be really hard to do overnight travel. And in fact, I was kind of excited to get back to the Becca I knew before, who was familiar and comfortable and liked to grind at work. But turns out that was really hard. And it was hard for my husband. It was hard for my kid. It was hard on me. And after I said yes to travel, I kind of wanted to go back and take it back. And so having a way to maybe say, you know what, the first week, I'd like to do halftime. Second week, let me try 75% time. Maybe by the third week, I'm ready to be 100% back. But maybe I don't want to do overnight travel until 2 months back. I don't know if my company can accommodate all those things, but it's worth a conversation. And not all mothers feel like they can bring that conversation forward. So whatever extent a manager, an HR professional, a senior leader can make that an open conversation and invite that discussion without promising something they can't, I think it's going to be a big trust builder. And I think it'll go a long way that the parent sees they're trying. There are some things like physical infrastructure. I mentioned the parking lot that didn't have expected mother parking, and where we live, it gets very icy. So there's a slip and fall incident. But there are other things too, like making sure there's a private room that people can pump. There was a not so great story shared about how a woman was trying to pump underneath her desk in an open office concept. And you can imagine just how uncomfortable that is, not just for the mother, but also the people who are trying to give her privacy, but work in the same area. So of course, there are certain things that the physical environment can also be conducive for. But I think generally speaking, empathy, increasing communication, and offering whatever flexibility is within your power as an organization, as a leader, and for whatever role that individual is in. Every role is going to have a different need for flexibility. Every person is going to have a different need. So how can we keep that dialogue open and do whatever we can within our reach?
Oh, I love that. And I'm sure leaders who are listening to this podcast will find, this advice very, very insightful, and they can just use it, right, every day when they welcome the working parents back from the maternity leave. And you also mentioned the role of a manager. So I want to dive into this and ask you, how should leaders rethink flexibility, culture, and managerial capabilities in this evolving landscape?
It's a really tough place leaders are in, because sometimes the organization will have really clear return to office priorities or mandates, where it's like, we have to be together to collaborate. And if that's the case, it can be hard to go against the grain and give exceptions. It can also be, let's call it what it is. US is a pretty litigious country. And now I know that my research was in the US, and this probably applies as a topic much broader than the US, but I think leaders, again, for very good reasons, are afraid to talk about family at work because they don't want to say the wrong thing. So how do you do that? How do you have a conversation about what flexibility someone who reports to you may need without opening yourself up for risk or liability? I think you can say things like, Gwen, you are so valued here. I see the hard work you put in. I think you have tremendous potential to grow because you are a curious learner. I know that you also have a strong followership. You have a great way of connecting with people. As you are returning back from this maternity leave, I want you to know that we are here to support you. And I can't promise that everything you ask for, I'm going to be able to grant, but I want to make sure that I want to make sure you know that I want to have that conversation at any point in time, no matter how it changes over the next couple months. Does it work for us to maybe check in once a week? How does that sound?
I love that. Sounds great.
Yeah.
I
But
love that.
but to say like, you're valued, we want you, and if it works for your life, we'd really like for you to continue to keep your home here for a career. We're going to do what we can to try to make this work and to make it a good experience for you. Can't promise anything, but let's at least commit to each other that we're going to have that conversation. I think that's the way you can do it in a safe fashion that is not going to leave either the organization or the leader up for any kind of risk.
Oh, I love this concept of at least have an open conversation and hear us out. I love that. And I really appreciate how you highlight the manager's role because I've seen the same pattern in organizations. I cannot really relate to, I guess it's 12-week leave, right? In Canada, it's 12 months and you can take up to 24 months. So I can't relate to that, but in the US, I've seen the same pattern where policies matter, but people managers kind of determine the lived experience, and sometimes they can make exceptions for either working parents or other type of employees. So I agree with you that a supportive manager can literally change a mother's confidence, her sense of belonging, and whether she decides to stay or not, because at the end, those managers and leaders are trying to retain the top talent, right? And especially for working parents, flexibility is so important. I'm a mom of 3 children, and I appreciate how important it is to be able to pick up my children. But then I can come back and work after the pickup time, or I can even work longer. But I would say flexibility is very important, and empathy and intentional conversations are what truly move the needle. This concept of having, invite your team members to this open conversation, I think it will make a big difference.
Yeah, and I loved what you said about that confidence piece, because that was one of the things that I found with my research as a theme is how you view others perceive you can change how you see yourself. So I'll give you an example. There was one finding in my study where when mothers were starting to doubt their own abilities coming back, if they had someone at work, and this was generally their leader, but sometimes it was their leader's leader or a different leader, if they had someone who believed in them, like they helped kind of cheerlead them on, like, you've got this, you can do this, like, it's hard right now, but you'll get there. Sure enough, their own confidence increased too. Alternatively, when mothers perceived that others viewed them as less committed, less able when they came back, they started to question their own value at work. Mm-hmm. And so there was certainly a correlation that I saw in my sample size of how mothers thought other people perceived them did end up having a bearing on how they saw themselves. And so if we as managers recognize that the words we choose, like, even if Gwen, if I'm interested in having you come attend a conference with me, but I know that you just returned back from maternity leave. Instead of saying, hey, you've got a little kid at home, you probably shouldn't come to this conference, I can take it. That might be planting a seed in your head, like, do you not think I can? Or do you think I shouldn't because I have a kid? And now you're kind of calling in my values as a mother. One way you could instead say that is, hey, there's this great opportunity for development. There's a conference in XYZ. I know you were very interested in that before. I want to offer it as an opportunity for you to join. I think it'd be great for you. I want you to know that it's your choice and it's not mandatory, because this opportunity will come up again some other time. So if now's not the right time, no problem, but you're invited and we'd love to have you there if you feel like it's right for you and your family. And that difference in how you approach something like that is, again, I see you, I value you, I know you're a human and you're a parent. Come if you want to, no penalty if not, versus the alternative is you probably don't want to do this. This is probably not good for you right now,
Well, we've heard your very generous advice to leaders and organizations, and I'm sure our listeners will value these. But what advice do you have for current and future parents returning to work?
Ooh. I think one of the biggest things is around your support system. I mentioned this earlier, but I had no idea how hard it was going to be. And I'm not saying that to dissuade anybody from trying to have a career and be a parent. It's worth it. However, I underestimated how much help I was going to need. And that when they say it takes a village, that's no lie. Neither my husband or I have parents that live in same state. And there have been so many instances where we're very humbled by the fact that sometimes it feels like we don't have a village all the time. But all that to say is there are people out there wanting to help. There are resources out there available, but you have to form your community. And that's super important. So think about what those supports can be for you, for your family, even before you leave on leave. And then accept help. That was another thing, is I'm not great at accepting help nor asking for it. And I think people rise to the occasion when you give them that opportunity. But I had to learn that a little bit the hard way. And then the biggest thing is just planning to whatever extent you can. The more that you make your handoff to leave smooth, the smoother it will be when you come back to kind of ramp back up. You will not be able to anticipate everything, but I think preemptive planning is really important before you go on leave. And then lastly, I think just the mind shift that it takes. Not just me, although it was also my experience, but through the research I found there's a profound amount of wrestling guilt constantly. And so I phrased it in my dissertation as reframe guilt and reclaim your joy. Meaning, if I'm feeling really badly that I'm missing dinner or bedtime or breakfast or something like that, how can I try to, in the moment, also celebrate something? Like, my kids may, at their age they are right now, really miss me at bedtime, and I really miss them too. And also, I can feel really proud of the fact that I want them to see that I love the work that I do, and that I hope to be a role model for them to find meaningful work in their career that they're proud of too. And so it's not like that's a perfect equation. I still feel guilt. I wrestle with it all the time. But if you are traveling, can you get a good night's sleep while you're on the road? There's little joys to be found in all of this. It's, can you find a way to kind of let go of that guilt and try to reclaim some of the stuff that is worth celebrating along the way, even if they're small.
I hear you. I'm the same way. And I'm just trying really hard, but the guilt is still there. So maybe, I don't know, I'll keep trying it. I don't know. It's hard.
It is. And if you figure it out, you let me know because I can use some help on that too.
I will. I will. Knowing that some of our listeners are prospective students or current doctoral students, including myself, I want to pivot to some questions about your dissertation journey before we conclude.
Yeah.
Can you say more about how you decided what research methods you used in your study, or how you decided the topic? I'm still working on figuring out my topic, but I would love to hear from you.
Well, I talk about my dissertation as my third child because it really felt similar. There's a lot of parallels. So for that, Gwen, anybody who is embarking on this journey, it really is about surrounding yourself with the right tribe. Similar to what I had given advice for mothers, how do you find the support system that's going to carry you through every phase of this? It can be, dissertation can be very individual and lonely. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. And I was really lucky to have informal mentors, formal mentors throughout that process, including committee members and my amazing chair. But as much as my amazing chair and committee members helped me, so did the students around me, both who are still in the program and also the alumni community. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Find your people, and know when and how to leverage them when you need it the most to help get you over some of the humps that you might face along the way. The other thing is that, as weird as it sounds, I did the best job at managing my own well-being in my final dissertation year. It was the first year that I kind of allowed myself to prioritize me as a really important time bucket, including working out, eating well, like cooking more versus eating out at restaurants. And I think that I just recognized that I needed that in order to manage my stress levels so that when I was with my family, friends, kids, I was not a stressed out, tired version of Becca. I was like happy to be there in the moment for whatever time I had with them in the moment before having to go pivot to writing papers at night or on the weekends. And so well-being is so much easier said than done, but man, did it really help me in my last year. And then I think the last one is I chose a topic that I loved and that I could spend the rest of my life talking about it. That carried me through some of the hard times because there are points where you'll hit a saturation point of I can't read another article. I can't write another word. I've stared at this data. I'm going cross-eyed. You start questioning every decision like, maybe I don't need the doctorate anymore. I don't know. But I think for me, knowing that I cared very deeply about the topic and that the topic never stopped exciting me. In fact, the more that I researched it, the more that I want to research it. That for sure helped carry me through. So my advice to anybody starting this process is don't marry yourself to a topic before you really flesh it out, but find one that you get really excited about, maybe like nerdy excited about, because that was probably one of the biggest drivers through this process that carried me quite far.
I love that. Making all the notes. I think I found a topic that I'm really, really passionate about. And I'm excited because I have to get started this summer to kind of have my topic ready. And also I would echo to what you said about our community. I think Penn CLO community is the best and I'm blessed to be part of it. So I feel like I'm hopeful to this journey with all the students and future students and the graduates that I can get my community around me while working on my dissertation. So very useful tips for all of us.
Well, I won't make you disclose it publicly here, but I would love to hear more about your topic and count me amongst your community and support network as you go through your journey.
Thank you so much. This means the world to me. Really appreciate that. I'll move to another question, even though I'm very excited to talk about my dissertation topic idea the same way you are, but I'll try to move to another question. As a working mother, how did you manage to mitigate your personal biases throughout while conducting the research and interviewing individuals?
That was one I was acutely aware of, right? I knew that I had not only the experience myself of being a working mother, but I was a working mother that also traveled overnight for work. And so I wanted to create my study design in a way such that I was minimizing researcher bias. I had to first kind of flush out some of those assumptions that I had about what I might find and what I think my research will say. And then you have to scrub them and remove them from your mind and find a way to get other perspectives. So I even built my committee based off of trying to find other perspectives. I wanted non-biological mothers on my committee who could challenge some of what I was researching, and even the way that I set up my study, that I was not feeding my own biases. I leaned on multiple coders. So when I was quality checking my transcripts and starting to code them and pull themes out of them, I also gave them to 3 other people so that we could compare whether or not what I was seeing was similar to what they were seeing and what might I be missing. Sometimes they were really spot on with each other, and sometimes there was another perspective that my eyes didn't see. And so I think awareness is for sure key, but then there's ways that you can build it into your study design so that you're minimizing that risk. I don't think bias ever goes away, but as long as you're acknowledging it and you're finding ways to try to mitigate it, lean on your committee to also help you with this, especially if you know that there's a specific bias you're trying to minimize. I did a couple of different types of data collection. So I did interviews and also photo voice. And I did that intentionally because I wanted stories to shine through. I think stories are so powerful. And so I wanted to find a way that people could express themselves in multiple ways. And then I looked at it through both an inductive and deductive lens as another way of kind of triangulating to make sure that that I wasn't missing anything and that the themes were kind of doubly backed by both methods.
I love that, and super helpful. And our PennCLO cohorts, some of us are staying to continue our coursework, and others now move to be doctoral candidates. Based off your own dissertation experience, what advice would you offer to those who are now doctoral candidates? We all are making notes, Becca, so give your advice.
It's so hard because I feel like it was yesterday that I crossed that bridge. My appetite is always bigger than my eyes are bigger than my stomach. I forget what that phrase is, but the same held true for my dissertation. Because I was very passionate about this topic, I wanted to do almost an endless research. I wanted to dig really deep and really broad, and I wanted to ask all the questions. I think what was really helpful for me is understanding getting your research question right. Your research question is going to guide your study. And what happened for me is that some of the interview questions that I was asking and some of the findings that I was already starting to see through my interviews were so exciting that I wanted to write about those too. And my chair was so kind in saying, Becca, that's not your research question. If you want to make another research question or change your research question, I'm not going to say no, but that means you might be going back to create a new lit review. You might need to go through more approval, whether it be IRB or other, in order to pivot your research question at this stage in your research. And also, she knew that for me, finishing within a year was really important. I wanted to give both really high quality, useful, practical data and findings, but I wanted to be done. I felt like I owed it to my family. And so she helped rein in that appetite I was telling you about. Like, she was like, you can do that, but write a book in 2 years. Like, don't try to do that now because I've heard you say loud and clear you want to graduate. And so in your doctoral year as candidates, figure out what your primary goal is. Is your goal to be able to go deep and wide and long? Because that's fine, but you might have a 4-year journey. I wanted to find a way to get done in a year while still producing great quality research. And my chair had to guide me a little bit because I think I was at risk of biting off more than I could chew and going longer than I had intended. So she helped keep me on track with my research question.
That's great. Thanks for sharing. So where do you go from here, Becca?
Oh, $1 million question. I don't have the answer yet. I can tell you where I'm sensing I may go. There's a lot of data yet that I have from my interviews that were not totally related to my research question. And so I would love to still mine that for themes and insights and potentially either, whether it be through articles or books, get that out into the world so that we can improve retention of working parents and help with kind of future competitive advantage for organizations. So there's quite a bit more I want to do, but I am definitely savoring the post-dissertation honeymoon right now. And so, but being here with you is so helpful because it's keeping me connected to my topic in a way that is feeding that fire for wanting to make it more tangible for the working world and out of the format of dissertation.
Oh, that's amazing. And I can't wait to see your best-selling book.
You and I both.
So, and the last question will be about the hope. What gives you hope right now about the future of work for parents, for leaders, and for organizations?
I think what's giving me hope is that no question, there's a lot of disruption. I'll speak just for the US market, but I have a feeling that it's probably globally. There is a lot of disruption in the market, in the workforce, in the talent landscape. And as sometimes frightening or anxiety producing as that can feel, or as challenging as how to solve for that in business, there's always opportunity for change. And sometimes through that disruption comes really positive change. And I think we're going to see and continue to, we have been seeing, and I think we'll continue to see a pretty volatile talent market, competitive talent market. I've heard they use the term a war for talent. I think we're in a war for talent, but I think it could get worse. And in that, organizations who do it right and focus on balancing that short-term and long-term talent strategy, building a pipeline for the future of their leaders, I think they're gonna come out really strong. And so I think what gives me hope is that I see some really great organizations doing this already, supporting not just working parents, but anybody going through big life transitions. And how do we generate that organizational loyalty in a world and a time in which organizational loyalty is not as prevalent as it once was? So I think we're ripe for disruption when it comes to future of work. I think there's a lot of people who care about this topic, and I really do think it spans bipartisan. So it's something we can all agree on that we want to support more parents. We just have to figure out how. And so I have a lot of hope that there's a lot of people thinking about this, experimenting with this, and I think there's positive change on the horizon.
Well, thank you so much, Becca, for your research insights and the work you're doing to humanize the future of work. And thank you to our listeners for joining us today. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe, share this episode, and connect with Dr. Becca Clanton on LinkedIn. Until next time, remember, the future of work is human.
Thank you, Gwen. Such a pleasure to be here with you.